All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa had a lovely weekend of 75-degree weather, but I hate looking at the weather update for the week because we're supposed to get another cold snap on Wednesday. And I'm thinking to myself, we know what cold snaps are these days, like 20-degree swings from one thing to the next. But otherwise, it was a lovely weekend for
hmm
walking and getting outside. But how are you today?
I'm good. I mean, I think when you say cold snap, I think, 20 degrees and snow, whereas you're probably thinking like 55 degrees.
Oh, of course, of course. The DMV meteorologists are not thinking that extreme. I know they're not
No,
thinking it
no, I
that
was
extreme.
I was thinking yesterday, can I
Uh-huh.
take the cover off of my patio table or are we
Oh,
gonna have one more snow?
that's a good question.
So I did
I'd
it's
wait just
still
a
it's
little
still
bit.
covered. I know I
Yeah,
might have
just
to wait
wait
just
just
a
a
little
little
bit longer.
yeah, just wait just a little bit. Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, let's get into our word of the week because we've got a lot to talk about. Both of our phases today are biggies. They're big ones. So, Dr.
hmm
Lisa,
hmm
what's our word or concept of the week here?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Schadenfreude, which you may all have heard of, or maybe not, but it's obviously a German word. And it's been coming up a lot. I'm listening to a number of podcasts where the hosts are joking that they have Schadenfreude because what it means is that there is pleasure derived from someone else's misfortune. So someone's having a bad time or they're in a bad situation, and the other person is deriving pleasure, malicious joy, I think one of the definitions was, and that there is a glee associated to the other person's bad luck. And so right now, Schadenfreude is everywhere, particularly with people who did not vote for the current president, who are
Oh, yeah.
looking at people who did, and those folks who are, oh, I didn't think he was talking about me when he said he was going to do ABC, or hmm, eggs and my grocery bills are going up, they're not going down, or the shelves are starting to get emptier. I can't buy the things that I want to buy. And so there is a whole lot of Schadenfreude happening with non-voters or non current president voters around. Well, isn't that interesting that
Mm-hmm.
you are now feeling that way? So I think that there is a time and a place for it, and I certainly have dabbled in it, but I'm not sure how helpful it is in the long run in terms of like broader cultural change and helping people understand and seeing the error of their ways by gloating at their unhappiness at their decision, right? So I don't know if you have a perspective on that, Shaunna, but I think
Mm-hmm.
there could be like, a brief moment and then recognizing that you're probably going to push people further away if you gloat too
Mm-hmm.
heavily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, I hear you on that. I hear as far as allowing people to sit in the accountability of their decision making is one thing.
Right.
The other thing is that we're all in a sinking boat with big holes in the bottom of it together, unfortunately. And at the same time, the first thing I thought about, Lisa, as far as like the long-term holding of Schadenfreude is for groups like my identity groups, it's just flat out of self-preservation. Like
Right.
I had a great conversation this week that was specifically talking about, of course, I have a heart for humanity. I do have empathy. I'm exhausted, especially after the most recent election cycle, but I literally don't have the strength or the energy to help others that did not want to be helped. And
Right.
so at
Right.
what point do you kind of bubble wrap yourself, someone who has attempted to help people avoid misfortune, and have been doing it for decades? That I think that's the tipping point for me and my identity groups is like, I've been caring and my family's been caring and my all of my descendants have been paying attention to this for decades. And so at what point do we say, hey, we're out of it?
Yeah.
So
I don't think that's Schadenfreude. I think Schadenfreude would be if you and yours were sitting there laughing at, pointing, and deriving a
mhm.
lot of pleasure from someone else's pain. That's not what you're saying. You're saying, we're done. I don't want to help you. I'm just going to walk away because that's self-preservation. That's different. That feels different to me.
It is a little different, but I still think, and this is just the natural pettiness that I feel about it, is that the humor therapy that comes from sitting back with a little bit of "I told you so" on things.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is a bit of self-preservation, because think about all the groups, including our groups that we represent, Lisa, women, people of color, etc., that have been gaslit thinking that, oh, you're over the
Yeah.
top, or oh, you're,
Yeah.
you're the what is it, the little chick that runs around that says the sky is falling, the sky is
Yeah.
falling.
Chicken Little. Chicken Little.
Chicken, thank you, Chicken Little, when it's like, we tried to tell you. And so for that, the being, I know I'm mixing in lots of words that we use all the time, but being gaslit, and then for certain that, no, I meant what I said. I base that off of centuries of my descendants' experiences, and you still didn't believe. So now I get the entertaining pleasure of sitting back for you to sit in the turmoil and misfortune that we tried to tell you. I mean, it's literally like running over that pothole that we've told you for 100 years is there, and no, I insist I must run over this pothole. Okay, well then go
Okay.
ahead. Good luck.
Okay. So
I'm
that little bit
excited
at
to
the
see
end
your
there.
car fall apart because you ran over the pothole. I'm excited to see it.
Long chair with your margarita, and you're just like, uh-huh, you do
Oh,
that. Yeah.
me and Dr. Lisa are serious about our margaritas too. So yes, that is a perfect visual. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Uh, but
Perfect.
yes, so I am loving that this phrase is coming up, because I do think we'll see it. We'll continue to see it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
We're going to
We
continue
will.
to see it for a
We will.
while. So
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, well, let's get into phase one. So since we're talking about margaritas, Lisa, and sitting back in our lawn chair and watching misfortunes,
Yeah.
let's jump right into this particular one where literally my identity group, African Americans, African American women specifically, pulled up on, I believe it's Route 1 in Louisiana, to watch the Nottoway plantation burn to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not exaggerating when I'm talking about
Nope.
margaritas, Lisa. I don't
Right.
know if it was margaritas or not, but I know that my sisters down in Louisiana were literally pouring out libations on the ground in glee
Yeah.
when it came to the burning down of this plantation. And so let me tell y'all a little bit about this plantation and how I think it's going to be interesting to see this similar experiences play out. So the Nottoway plantation is the largest, or was the largest, antebellum mansion in the South. 53,000 square feet of a 64-room mansion that was built by another native Virginian, Lisa, John Hampden Randolph, back in the 1850s. And Lisa, when I heard about the fire initially, I heard Nottoway, which anytime I hear some type of Virginia reference from at home, I stop what I'm doing, obviously. And so I heard Nottoway and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've got, family friends in Nottoway, Virginia. Is everything okay? And of course, in Virginia, we're going to have plantation houses. So
Right.
that
Right.
would have made sense, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
keep listening and they start talking about they're close to the Mississippi River. I'm like, oh, they're talking about Louisiana. And so John Hampden Randolph built this mansion in the 1850s, named it after what would have been considered his hometown, which was Nottoway, Virginia. And he was a enslaver, frankly. He was what's considered a sugar baron. Now, Lisa, I have to tell you, the language around this in the news and on their website is very interesting, because they don't want to say enslaver. They don't want to say a master. They don't even want to say sugar baron. In some places they call
Ridiculous.
him a businessman,
Ridiculous.
right?
Just bullshit. Bullshit.
Yeah. exactly. And so records are showing that he enslaved at least 155 Black people in the 1860s, but there's some other records that bump it up a little bit to like 176, 175. Had 6,200 acres of land, much of it, again, let me tell you something. You're going to be hard pressed in this country to find a situation that affects Black people that did not also affect our Indigenous
Right.
siblings. And so
Right.
that's exactly what happened here, where that land was taken from our Indigenous siblings and used the building of the mansion and the property to expand Black stolen labor. And let me tell y'all, I've been down south to see a replica of a sugarcane boiling house. And let me tell you, that work is so freaking dangerous and uncomfortable. I know the number of lives lost was incredible. I mean, you know, think about anything boiling, but boiling sugar that you might have unfortunately dipped your hand in, and now, you lose either fingers or
Yeah.
limbs or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
replica that I went to was so incredibly hot that I could only get maybe 50 feet away from the building that the boiling cauldron was in.
Wow.
So I'm just imagining um, everything that can happen with that: burns, amputation, even, at some point, death if you happen to fall
Yeah.
into something, that type of
Oh,
thing. And so
yeah.
now let's flip the script on that. When I heard about the plantation fire, I'm thinking, ooh, my first thought before I looked at any social media, any opinions about it was, oh, isn't that lovely? Because we don't really need that. But let me check and see
Right.
who the owner is first. Let me see who's the owner first, because that will make me change my opinion, right?
Okay. Okay.
And so I look it up and I find out, oh, it's not owned by Black people, so let it burn. You're welcome. Let it burn. And so, as I'm thinking about it, Lisa, you know, the I was just sharing this with someone yesterday, that the Nottoway plantation is a example of a couple of great things. We could go on and on about it, but a couple of great things. The first one is, yes, you're going to see lots of people who are either African Americans, African descendants, or allies of our communities that are, hallelujah. They're like, okay, where'd the matches
Mm-hmm.
come from? Thank you, because they're grateful that we don't have to be reminded of the sordid
Right.
history when there was an opportunity to educate on the history. So that's one thing. Um, but then I think with the second piece of this experience is lying by omission is very real, Lisa. And
Yeah.
I feel like white supremacy allows a lot of lying by omission in this freaking country.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, we want to talk about the freaking architecture of the mansion and all the property, every single tree. I mean, especially for arborists, because I know lots of people do that and it's an entire science in and of itself. Every single tree was named on the property, but you don't have accurate record of the Black people that were
Right.
stolen and indentured there on that property,
Mm-hmm.
other than if I found a dissertation, Lisa, where an individual had some really poignant photos of the quote unquote Negro cemetery on that property, which did have names and dates on their crosses
Okay.
and their final resting places. But if you did not die on that property, but you were in servitude there, they have no record of your existence. You as a human being existence, not a
Mm-hmm.
number of inventory existence. And so I don't like the lying by omission. And I think that's where the glee comes from, is that when are we, Lisa, I loved your word before, is that when are we going to illuminate the dark spaces, pun very much intended, when are we going to illuminate the dark spaces of the story that never gets told? Because
Right.
people want to step over to the, oh, look at the beautiful architecture, when we're not willing to talk about the literal blood, sweat, tears, and
Yeah.
lives that built that architecture and how it was built and why it's important. And so, you know, it's this constant trying to highlight things that people want to hide very well.
Mm-hmm.
It kind
Mm-hmm.
of reminds me, Lisa, when the boys were really small, I used to hide things around the house, and then I would forget where I hid it, and I couldn't find it anymore because I wanted them to be safe, or I didn't want them to get
Yeah.
into the candy bar or whatever it is, and then I couldn't find it myself. I feel like that's exactly what happened in this country, is that we have continued to intentionally hide everything that surrounds
Yeah.
slavery. And
Yeah.
then when someone attempts to illuminate it, then we're the bad guys for laughing at the fire. It's like, wait a minute, we've been trying to illuminate our experience for decades, but you didn't want to see it. So let that shit burn so you can't ignore it.
Right. Right.
So, Lisa, what were your thoughts when you first heard of the plantation fire? We know that there's tons of, I think
Mm-hmm.
I read there's like over 350, 400 plantations that still exist here in the US. But this being one of the largest, how did you respond when you heard about the fire?
Yeah, I actually hadn't heard of this plantation. I've done some reading on some others, but this one I was not familiar with. And I think my first thought was anyone inside, right? Like that was my, and then as soon as I think you said no, I'm like, okay. There are there are plenty more plantation buildings that, I feel like
Yes,
it's
yes,
not like
yes.
there's a lack of those buildings. And I mean I get I do get to some degree the concern over the loss of a historic building, but as I understand it, this building was a quote unquote resort, right? Where people would
Right,
have events and meetings and weddings. And so if this were a kind of national historic site where its only purpose, which is true of some other plantation sites across the country, was education, providing accurate history of the pain and brutality that happened there as a means to create a more educated citizenry, then that feels like a loss to me, because now that opportunity to educate isn't there. But it doesn't sound like that was even much. I mean, it feels like it was a little bit of an afterthought, this place, right? Because they were largely booking it out for events and such. And I think you told me the Facebook page doesn't mention anything about the fact that an
no,
enslaver owned it and had
right,
nearly,
right.
somewhere between 155 and 200 enslaved
Mm-hmm.
people, and then the ways in which that they almost certainly experienced sexual violence and other forms
Yes.
of violence, that was just absent, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so then
Mm-hmm.
I think any kind of comment around, well, it's really sad that an old building has been burned, feels disconnected from
Mm-hmm.
the reality of what that building represents. And so I think, I mean, I like truly, it does not bother me one teensy bit that folks are setting up lawn chairs and having a drink and watching it burn, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if there's no one in it, good riddance is kind of what I thought when I heard that from you.
Well, and I'm also not here for the feigned care about these topics either, because the current owner bought the plantation in at least around November of last year, because that's when the Facebook post started about
Okay.
congratulations, you now own the property, looking forward to what you do next with it, blah blah blah. And that to me was, I'm gonna, another pun. I was incensed. I
Ah,
was incensed when I read these posts, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's not feign that we cared about what it represented when we had years to talk about that, years
right,
to
right,
apply that to the work, years to, like, for example, the owner is considering rebuilding, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm not even sure that I trust that, because what can you educate people on around these
right,
topics?
right,
Or are you going to make this a priority like the Whitney plantation does? I doubt that very seriously. Why?
right,
Because as much as it disgusts me, the owner has the right to use it for capitalism because they purchased it with their money, as much as that disgusts me. So let's not, feign that he can't do that. And then also, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Lisa, is that, okay, how is this considered? Let's just put on our business brain, for example, Lisa. Let's not, we are going to intentionally now exclude slavery and Blackness in this particular case. Is it really good business to have a building that is hundreds of years old, much of it built with pine, and you didn't even have freaking sprinklers in it? And you thought
Yeah.
nothing would happen? That's bad business in and of itself. And
Yeah.
so, when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, for all those people that feigned that they cared so much about the architecture and the history, we might as well go ahead and say the part that they're going to leave out, the white history that they want to
Yeah.
hold to there. Even if
Yeah.
you did care about the white history, you did not care enough to even make sure the infrastructure was appropriate enough to keep it there.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm not here for the feigned ignorance or the feigned devastation over this property. I'm not. And so I'm going to be watching, Lisa, as to whether it's rebuilt or not. Um, and I'm also too paying attention to who rejoices and who doesn't, and for what
Hmm.
reasons. I definitely don't want uh, anybody to be hurt, obviously. And from what I read in a couple of different Facebook posts, they had just done a tour of the property, but it took 12 firehouses to
Mm.
come and you know try to at least contain it. Because if you look at the map of the property or even the aerial visuals of the property, those flames could have easily jumped
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
other properties or other
Yeah.
areas, and it didn't. So but yeah, this one is an interesting one, Lisa, and I have to say, help me pronounce it correctly. Schadenfreude.
Yep. Yep.
Yep, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. And we never want anyone to get hurt, obviously, but at the same time, what it represents to so many people. um, Someone mentioned on one of my social media posts, um, would you want to just set up and have your Sunday brunch at Auschwitz every weekend?
Right.
Like they were using examples of that, Lisa, in order to help people to understand, because there are some folks that may only understand it from a different identity group's perspective as to how heinous it is. And so I'm at the point now where I'm just like, you know what? If they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. It's gonna be all right. Because
Yeah.
this
I
is the
think
owner still benefits regardless, whether
the
he
owner.
takes
Yeah.
the owner, whether he takes the insurance money and rebuilds, or he just takes the insurance money and moves on with his life. He
Right.
still wins, if you will, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. It's just interesting that this is happening at a time when there's an active um quest to white whitewash history
Mm-hmm.
that had been previously kind of, I think about like crocuses coming up in the spring, right? Like I think about our like US
Yeah.
history has just been whitewashed. And then in the last 20 to 30 years, there's been an effort to really pull back the curtain to have that information come to light so that we can have a fuller understanding of US history, the good, the bad, and
Mm-hmm.
the ugly. And now we're in a climate that is trying to go backwards and cover it all up again. And so then to have this plantation burn down is also, it's just really interesting situated within this larger context, because the current president is in many ways trying to burn down all of these
Hello.
strides that we have made in recognizing
Mm-hmm.
the fullness of US history, right? And whose voices and experiences have been left out. And now this is just ashes. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that for me is curious, I guess, to think about it in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I've for anyone that's listening to this episode, Lisa, I don't want to make it seem like a bifurcated thought. Like there are either people
Right.
rejoicing or people that are super sad. There are some people that are in the middle, like there
Yeah.
are African Americans that have had family events there that, are reminiscing on social media. So please don't think there's just two groups. But I think, Lisa, we need to encourage people to think about not just, oh, I'm so offended that someone's taking joy, but
Yeah.
why would the
Right.
person take joy?
Right.
It's not shallow. It's
Mm-mm.
very deep roots that have been
Yep.
in the shadows for a long time. So, anywho, there we have it. But Lisa, let's keep watching to see what the owner does and
Mm-hmm.
how folks support the notion of educating on that history that we don't want to lose either. So,
Right. Right. Right.
all right, on to the next.
Okay. Phase 2. So, birthright citizenship, another biggie. So around the same time as the fire at Nottoway, there was also a case at the Supreme Court related to the birthright citizenship executive order. So for folks who may not be aware or don't remember, on the first day of the current president's term, he signed an executive order that removed birthright citizenship from individuals who are born in this country to undocumented parents or parents who are here on temporary status. There's a few other pieces to it, but that's essentially it, which is in direct conflict with the 14th Amendment, that says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So this case got challenged immediately, the executive order rather got challenged immediately, and 3 federal courts put a nationwide injunction, right, saying you can't implement this. One of those judges in Seattle is quoted in their opinion. They said, I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order. And that was U.S. District Judge John Couganor. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name there. So this is where it gets interesting, Shaunna, is the case that made its way up to the Supreme Court was not about the facially unconstitutional nature of the executive order. It was about whether district court judges can issue nationwide injunctions, meaning can a district court in Baltimore, Maryland, say this executive order is unconstitutional and I'm blocking it for the entire country versus just the state of Maryland, right? That was what was being challenged. So that's what the court heard, and it's a little unclear where they're going to land on this, because these nationwide injunctions or universal injunctions have been a problem. If you cast your mind back to mifepristone, which is one of the drugs used in a medication abortion, a Texas judge by the name of Matthew Kacsmaryk, who is kind of an unpleasant person, he issued a nationwide injunction related to the use of mifepristone that ended up having to, his prohibition had to then get stopped by another court, right? And so at that point, folks who are pro reproductive justice and abortion care availability were pretty irate that this one single judge in a district in Texas could block access to mifepristone for the entire country. So it's not that this is just a liberal or a conservative thing, right? It is an issue. But with this particular case, what ended up coming out at argument, and what I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is if you say nationwide injunctions are unconstitutional, allowing the Trump administration to partially implement the executive order on birthright citizenship, what that would mean is that states who are not challenging the executive order would have a situation where children born there to undocumented parents or temporarily, people who are legally here but temporarily, their kids would not be citizens. But a neighboring state who has said that the order is unconstitutional, their kids would be citizenship. So you could have a situation where family with a newborn could go from state A to state B to state C to state D and literally go citizen, not citizen, citizen, not citizen. Like in the course of a few days, it takes them to get across, right? And so the argument
Mm-hmm.
from the plaintiffs, so the 22 states that New Jersey's Solicitor General was arguing, and then a woman who works at Georgetown Law who was representing immigration groups and expectant mothers, was it's just impractical, right?
Right,
Like
right,
aside from
right.
whether you think universal injunctions are constitutional or not, right? In this
That's right.
particular case, it's absolutely ridiculous and impractical, and the government has no workable way of like partially implementing this executive order. And
Absolutely.
so,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
and I forget who it was that said this. It might have been Elena Kagan who said the government, you
Hmm.
have not brought you have not filed suit to challenge um a court saying that your executive order is unconstitutional, right? You are coming
Mm.
to us saying you want us to say nationwide injunctions are unconstitutional. So it
Hmm.
feels like an end run around addressing whether or not your executive order is unconstitutional, which it clearly is because it is in direct opposition to the 14th Amendment, right?
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
they know that they're going to lose if they were to come through the court
Yeah.
system with that. So instead of
Hmm.
that, they say, okay, we're going to go with the injunction piece because then we can at least partially implement it. So they're never going to get an
Hmm.
answer on there whether the executive order is unconstitutional. They don't want to do that because they know they'll lose. So I think
That's
it was
right.
Kagan who
That's
said
right.
this is just an end run around it. And then Justice
Uh-huh.
Ketanji Brown Jackson was like, this is going to create like a catch me if you can
Yeah.
situation where people are hopping
That's
states,
right.
right?
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
and
Hmm.
Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Sotomayor said, I can name at least 4 Supreme Court precedents that the executive order is in violation of. So it
Hmm.
really doesn't bode
Hmm.
well on its face, right? So I'm wondering, what are your
That's
thoughts
right.
about this? Um,
Well, let's let's remind people of the geography lessons that people also need to remember just in the practicality of it. Because Lisa, I remember in high school when we used to have the mock debates and where you would take on the perspective of the other perspective. You take on the other opposing perspective and try to
okay,
defend that to better understand your own. And so even as I try to think about how this could or would work,
right.
I live here in the DMV area. It's called that for a reason. DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And you can also kind of fudge that into Delaware, right? So, all of that geography going on. And so if you live here in the area, it is not impractical. In fact, it's almost a daily experience here that you
Mm-hmm.
can cross between Maryland, DC, Virginia, back to DC, back through Maryland in a day's time for whatever reason. So, for example, if you are a government employee here and you work at, for example, the Pentagon, hey, folks that don't know their geography and their US civics, even the Pentagon isn't next door in DC, it's actually in Virginia. And so
Mm-hmm.
people take the metro line through from Maryland through DC to Virginia to go to work every day, for example. Or let's say you're a kid that gets to go to a charter school, or you got a scholarship to go to a specific school that focuses on fine arts or on sports, or a Catholic school in the area. This is all not uncommon because we've looked at it for the boys. You can see a kid that lives in Virginia, but they are taking the metro line to go over into Maryland to get to school so that their private or their public charter school bus can pick them up from the metro to take them to their school. So this is just our day-to-day lives. And so how in the world do you enforce that when, okay, I might be a citizen here in Maryland, but as soon as I get over to Virginia, I'm not? Like,
Right.
what the
Right.
hell? And so, I think the catch me if you can perspective of Ketanji Brown Jackson is I can see that clearly. I'll be on the Metro, Lisa, going into DC for work or whatever, and I'll see little kids either before school or after school in their school uniforms, and I know exactly where they're going. It may
Mm-hmm.
be in state, but many of them it's not. And so I think this is, even if you were to support it, it's not practical for places like here. New Jersey, obviously, New Jersey, New York, that geographic line as
Right.
well can be challenging. And so with that, I just don't see how it's it can be implemented in ways that are equitable and fair, because how do you get to say, okay, Lisa, you stop at the state line? You stop at the state line. You don't cross over here, right? And when it comes to employment, because I'm also thinking, Lisa, from an HR perspective, especially now when we have, more remote and hybrid work. Well, let's say, work and school, frankly. So let's say you are a citizen in the state where you reside, but you go to school or you go to work in yet another state, and HR has to either broker your benefits or you have to broker paying for school. Well, then how does this work? So, even if you're a supporter, I challenge someone to explain how that would work. I do agree that it is a logistical nightmare and it would not occur, in addition to not supporting it. But if I did, I don't see how it's practical.
Yeah. Yeah, and the government doesn't have any real plan for this at all, right? And so the New Jersey Solicitor General was like, so there are 6,000 babies that are born to New Jerseyans. I don't know if that's what they're called,
Mm-hmm.
who are born outside of the state of New Jersey every year, right? But they are
Mm-hmm.
residing in New Jersey. So in the state that they get born, there would have to be a verification process. And then when they come back into the state, there would have to be a second verification process, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
essentially that newborn or the family of the newborn would not then be able to ever leave the state of New Jersey, right?
Uh-huh.
Or that you have to hop across the United States, only look for jobs in states where their child would be considered a citizen, because if they go anywhere else, then that child is under threat of deportation, and that child at this
Deportation.
point is a
Mm-hmm.
newborn, right? So
That's
it
right. That's
severely
right.
limits access for children, for schooling, education, to your point, jobs, that sort of thing. How does that work for HR? It's also difficult around government benefits, so SNAP or Medicare, Medicaid, and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? Like you're eligible in one state and not in another. Like that doesn't seem to make any sense. So it'll be interesting to see what happens regarding this. I would anticipate we'll hear at the end of June the result, maybe sooner, but what kind of limiting principle they could come up with to limit these nationwide injunctions, but not in this case, because in this
Yeah.
case, one, on the merits, it's clear that it's unconstitutional. Two,
Mm-hmm.
the Trump administration is trying to go around that by focusing on this injunction. And three, it's
Yep.
logistically impossible to implement in
Impossible.
any way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was
But
it's fascinating, really, how this is playing out.
well, and Lisa, just real quick, I think again, it's been a common refrain that we've had for weeks and weeks of this podcast now, is that
Mm-hmm.
let's go back to I'm gonna pronounce this word right, Schadenfreude. It I want to go back to that too, because again, we know that a major characteristic of just broadly Republican perspectives on things, and especially 45, 47, the goal is to do just this. It's to stir fear and chaos for things that are
Yes. Yeah.
impractical, and they don't necessarily work, but you still have to take it seriously because they're trying to make it work. And so it stirs that fear and chaos, and then hopefully it retracts. I mean, we've seen it, Lisa, we can go down the laundry list of things that have occurred that this similar formula has occurred.
Yeah.
This birthright citizenship, tariffs have occurred. Like we can go down
Yeah.
the list of things. And so, with that, I the intellectual frustration I think that you and I probably have on
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we have to make sure, like our president is like the little boy that cried wolf many times, where it's like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, but and then what happens when he actually lowers the boom in that one thing he actually does? Like we have to pay attention, and it's intellectually exhausting, but that's what
Mm.
he wants. There's a certain group in this country that want to keep us exhausted when it comes to and we still have to, I mean, let's be clear, Lisa, I'm not shutting down the podcast saying we shouldn't entertain it, but that's part of the strategy. It's part of the strategy.
Yeah, yeah, and just avoiding all accountability and going around the courts, right? Because what the
That's
the
right. That's
the
right.
Solicitor General for the United States, which is the Trump appointee,
Mm-hmm.
Amy Coney Barrett, who's a, most recent Trump nominee and appointee, like
Appointee.
she was incredulous that this guy was like in
Yeah,
her question about, well, would you listen to the appeals court then? Because appeals courts oversee like 3 to 5 states, right? So
that's
he's
right. That's
arguing,
like a region. Yep.
yeah, like a district court can't do this. And she's
Hmm.
like, well, what if it was an appeals court? Would the administration abide by that ruling? And he was like, eh, generally, maybe. And so she's just like, excuse me, right?
Exactly,
So
as she should be. Yes, yes,
yeah, and
yes.
so it's
No
also
accountability.
it's the no accountability. I can do what I want,
Hmm.
and who's going to stop me, right? And I'll end here on I was teaching my policy class the other day, and a student asked a
Hmm.
question, and it was just so, it crystallized all of it, because she just said, so I'm confused. So there's been this ruling by the Supreme Court, and it was around Kilmar Obrego Garcia, and they told him to bring him back, and they haven't. So, like, is that a thing? Like, can they just ignore the
There
court?
you
Like,
go.
what happens, right?
There you go.
And
There you go.
she didn't, like, she couldn't understand why it
Hmm.
wasn't being obeyed. And I said, I don't have a good answer for you, because yes, they should be abiding by this Supreme Court ruling, and they are not. And
There you go.
how to enforce that is unclear. So yeah.
Lisa, that the enforcement, because you and I have talked about this many times before, working with clients and organizations where we work with them to write this beautiful policy about
Right.
inclusion and great behavior. And you and I are almost seen as the bad guys to bring them back to reality, to say, okay, so what's the next step when,
Yep.
if or when someone does not abide by the policy? Because this is just a piece of paper we can throw around right now. What's going to, and then they're looking at us like, oh my God, I never thought that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, you have to think about the people that don't give a shit about your policy on paper, your ruling, your any of it. You have to think about that. If not, it is just a piece of paper with ink on it. That's it.
Exactly.
No
Yeah.
more, no less. So, oh goodness. Well, look, Lisa, we always have plenty to discuss on this
Sure do.
podcast. We are creeping slowly but surely to what? 200. We're getting close.
Yeah.
So with that, y'all, that's a wrap on this week's episode. Please make sure you share this with folks, especially if you had some Schadenfreude feelings and thoughts about all of this over the last few weeks. You can reach us on all social media, and your favorite podcast app will certainly have us at Unfazed Unedited. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com, or just visit our website for all the things, unfazedpodcast.com, to access both the old and the new shows. So if you like this week's episode, like, subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, your coworkers, with that margarita in your lawn chair while we watch things burn. All right, Lisa, until next time.
All right. Until next time.